Brotherhood. In October of that year, they would also introduce the 1 Tamriel update, which meant that every zone would scale to the player's level. Prior to this, each zone had a set level. Players could only visit certain areas once they were strong enough. This led to certain areas becoming barren and really great zones receiving few visits. Now, players can visit anywhere at any level. In 2017, they released the Morrowind chapter, and this was a huge hit. This allowed players to visit an entirely new giant-sized map, with lots of side quests and lots of things to find. It was at this point that ESO's player count shot up. They would then release Clockwork City later that year, which was a smaller-sized DLC with another new zone. At this point, they had their formula. Every year, they would release 4 updates, each quarter, with 1 giant-sized chapter zone, 1 smaller zone, and 2 dungeon expansions. This new setup worked, and it established a strong fan base. Each year after this saw continuous growth as the new content kept coming and increasing in both quality and quantity. In 2020, Elder Scrolls Online reached its peak with 2 expansions in Greymoor and Markov. It helped that they were set in Skyrim, which, like Morrowind, tapped into nostalgia, but the game at this point was hugely popular. Fans loved these new DLCs and always had a reason to return twice a year to the game. Up until this point, ESO had been growing year upon year and was set to continue that trend after releasing the Blackwood expansion in 2021. And then, later that year, Microsoft acquired ZeniMax Media, Bethesda's parent company, in a $7.5 billion deal. This meant Microsoft would be running everything Bethesda going forward, including the Elder Scrolls Online. This is when the changes began to take place. The next year, in 2022, ESO kept the same formula, dropping quarterly DLC, including the big chapter High Isle and the smaller Firesong DLC. This formula had worked well for them, but it would be the last time that we would ever see it. In 2023, they released Necrom, which was the large chapter, but did not release a follow-up, as usual. In 2024, we got Gold Road, but yet again, no second add-on. So, from 4 updates a year to barely 1. So not only had they cut down on content expansions, but the add-ons themselves were declining. The maps were smaller, the activities lesser, the content shorter. Players no longer had a reason to return every 3 months, and when they did, they would find the content lacking. ESO had ditched the model that had brought them substantial growth each consecutive year. Strange, right? And then in December of last year, an article came out stating that
I haven't really eaten today. I'm going to eat. I will be right back. I'm going to get some sausage. Or I guess I have. I had pizza today, but it was at like noon. It's 12 hours ago. I don't know what I want. I could do the broccoli, but I could do some refried beans. Could do some chicks. Let's have a bowl of cereal, I guess. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Okay.
Content updates once a year and is switching to smaller bite-sized seasons in 2025. I've done a video on that here, but the point is the formula that worked so well and made ESO the #1 MMO worldwide was suddenly thrown away in favour of a different system. What happened? Well, player count dropped. Just last year, ESO saw its lowest player count since 2018, marking a low point for the online game. And what was the replacement content, the seasons? Well, it was less about new great content and more about daily tasks. Log in daily, do repetitive tasks daily, keep coming back daily and doing stuff and we will reward you. Rather than new content, it was reused assets. Buy stuff, buy crowns, but you can't gift them, but just buy. Now, back when this first happened, this article said that the changes were due to staff being overworked on the old model, and maybe that was true, but the more I look at it, it's got that Microsoft greed smell all over it. Not only did they cut costs by producing less content, but they increased profits by focusing on the microtransactions. Beautiful handcrafted open worlds replaced with outfit add-ons, handwritten quests replaced with daily repetitive radiant tasks, less emphasis on providing quality additions to the game, and a stronger focus on maximizing revenue with fewer costs. And so the player count dropped, but the money went up. Anyway, it turns out a lot of the ZeniMax team had actually left to work on a new MMO, codenamed Blackbird. Blackbird had been in development since 2018, with a team of around 200 people, eventually growing to 300. Xbox head Phil Spencer went to go and test this new game, and he started playing it and had to be pulled away because he was having so much fun with it. After the meeting in March, in which executives had nothing but complimentary words for the project, the team put together a plan to flesh out the vertical slice and then build out more content for release. Then, a mere 4 months later, the entire game was scrapped and the team was left facing uncertainty because apparently Microsoft couldn't even get firing people right. Schreier says the team came into work to discover disabled Slack accounts and a project update meeting scheduled in which Blackbird's death was announced. Not only was the project shut down and many staff let go, but longtime serving developer Matt Fryer was let go too. Microsoft also let staff go from Romero Games, Blizzard, Sledgehammer Games, High Moon, The Initiative, who made Perfect Dark, Rare, who were working on Everwild, Turn 10 Studios, and Raven Software. In total, 9,000 employees were laid off across Microsoft this year. This adds to the layoffs from last year where they laid off over 8,500 employees from its gaming division, including staff from Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks as part of major restructuring efforts. Okay, so I hear you, dear viewer. You're thinking, well, dude, if they're struggling to make ends meet, they gotta let people go. I mean, that's just business. Well, here's the issue. Phil Spencer just announced this year that Xbox Game Pass hit almost $5 billion in annual revenue and Microsoft had record sales. Wow. Now, a year ago, I made this video where I explained that Xbox deserved their struggles. It was my most disliked video to date. Do you know why? Because just a few days later, the Xbox Showcase came out and everybody was like, oh man, Xbox are back. And they hit me with comments of, well, this video aged well. In fairness though, they did showcase Perfect Dark, which absolutely looked, oh, never mind. Well, anyway, Fable was announced and that game blew, oh wait, never mind. Well, Rare's Everwild got people, oh shoot. So, my point is, Microsoft did this big show and dance, flexing their muscles, yet rarely delivered on a lot of what was promised. Now, you might think my story at the start of this video, complaining about the gifting problem, was me complaining, and it is. But it highlights a huge problem with Microsoft and Xbox. They bought ZeniMax when ESO was at its peak. It had a model that was working and provided quality content yearly to fans, and they actually looked after their players. They made a ton of money, but it didn't feel dirty. It felt earned. It was worth the money because we got bang for our buck. Since Microsoft took over, the game has received less updates, provided less quality, and become all about maximizing revenue and cutting costs, including staff. I loved ESO for 10 years, but now I can't stand it. They took a hugely successful IP and turned it into a game that's at its lowest point, and now I don't feel like a valued customer. I feel like a statistic where their only goal is to squeeze every dollar out of me. If I'm alone in this, please let me know in the comments, but let's talk about Xbox really quickly. When they announced that they were going fully in on the Games Pass, they wanted to dominate the gaming market, but they needed games on the Games Pass, so they went on a spending spree. They bought ZeniMax and Bethesda for $7.5 billion and Activision for $68.7 billion. In the past 8 years, Xbox has bought more than 24 gaming studios who will produce games for this new Games Pass model. You could have all these games for just one monthly fee of around $10. It seemed too good to be true. And it actually was. It wasn't a viable business model, and they began to take a loss. Xbox's hope was that they could offer so much for such a low price that they could run out the competition, as Sony couldn't compete. They hoped that everyone would turn to Xbox and leave PlayStation 5 in the dust, and at that point they could up their prices. But their games were not as good as they had hoped, and it didn't happen. But now they were in a situation where they were losing money with this Games Pass model, and they needed to recoup their investments. They had to up the price. In June of 2017, Games Pass was introduced at $9.99 a month. In 2023, it was increased to $14.99, and then to $16.99, and now to $19.99. So that is a 100% markup over just a few years. But they still weren't making enough. So this is why they had to shut down projects, make huge staff cuts at the studios they bought, and we see these cutbacks at games like ESO now. In other words, Xbox wanted to win at any cost. They would be the exclusive console to offer certain games by certain studios, so they bought them all out. And when they realized that they couldn't afford those studios, they shut them down. If they can't have their games, no one can. In their desire to dominate the gaming market and have all the exclusives, they did more damage than you ever could have anticipated. They closed studios, and now no one gets to play Blackbird. Nobody gets to play Everwild. Nobody gets an ESO new DLC in 2025. They have laid off thousands of employees and then have the audacity to post record profits without paying any respects to those laid off. In fact, Xbox executive producer Matt Turnbull suggested using AI chatbots like ChatGPT to help those get over their job loss. They really are acting like some cyberpunk corporation right now. Microsoft bought up so many gaming studios, and after acquiring them and forcing them into the Games Pass model, which didn't make financial sense, guess who was punished? The studios, not the ones who bought them. This is an awful thing to do, a terrible way to run things, and unfair not just to the studios, but to gamers as well. Hi-Fi Rush blew every metric out the water in terms of reviews and player count, and for a new
The
title,
game wasn't
it was
that
beloved.
good.
Xbox responded by immediately shutting their studio down. So if those that succeed are punished, then how do you survive? If that game had been released by
Because the game wasn't that good.
It's
It's
owned by Xbox,
you know, not a
it would be
memorable
cherished, and
game.
that studio would be expanding onto their next title. Instead, they no longer exist. If Xbox owned,
I remember an old
studios,
an
they
old
would've
Samurai
closed them
Jack
down
game that stood
before
out
this
better
came
than
free.
that fucking game.
But just to touch back on ESO, this game meant a lot to
Hi-Fi
me,
Rush.
and I loved this game. But when I go back to play it now, it just doesn't feel the same. I can't even see the content on my screen because it's constantly polluted with pop-ups of daily activities and microtransactions. I have no reason to return as there's no new chapters to look forward to. I get treated poorly by the customer service, and now the player count has reached its lowest low. I don't have proof that this is solely because of Microsoft, but when you check the stats, the patterns, and slap Microsoft's purchase date in there, there is definitely a pattern between the game's decline and their ownership. ESO will always hold a special place in my heart, but I fear the game I loved no longer exists. There was the ESO of old and the ESO of now, and personally, this game no longer feels like a game I remember. ZeniMax had an established plan of 4 yearly updates, and it clearly worked. Every year their numbers went up in player count, player satisfaction, and revenue earned. ESO was on such a good course, and after Microsoft came in, that entire plan was thrown away in place of a more cost-effective approach, which has led to the game's decline in all those metrics. It is for all these reasons that I feel Microsoft has destroyed the Elder Scrolls Online, just like it's destroyed so many other beloved IPs in recent years. Microsoft can brag about record profits, but if you don't feel anything in your heart when you hear how many people have lost their jobs because of their actions, then, well, I don't know what.
There's software developers, I don't have any sympathy for them. Make better games or whatever.
Judging by everything,
nobody has sympathy for me when my businesses were shut down.
But anyway, that's it for this one. But what do you guys think? Do you still play the Elder Scrolls Online? Do you feel that it's declining?
Why should I care about software developers? They retire to their house in the hills to cry.
Right for the way they're handling things. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'm Av Gaming, where we do video game analysis, identifying what makes great games great, and what can make good games great as well. Thanks for watching. Av out.
Jimmy the
This
Giant.
video is brought to you by Squarespace. Picture this, right? It's a day like any other. You wake up, you have your morning coffee, you question your life choices, and then you notice a wet sensation around your toes. Your washing machine has broken. So for the next few days, you're transported into a new reality, and you do something you never had to do before in your life. You go to a laundromat. And so as you head towards this place, you get closer and closer, and you look around and you notice things around you start changing. The houses lose colour, satellite dishes hang off of people's roofs. You get out the car, you instinctively lock it about 5 times, and suddenly a thought unconsciously enters your brain. Jesus, this place is rough. Now look, eventually your dad's mate fixes the washing machine. Your life goes back to normal and you never go back to this place. However, you can't escape the impression that it left on you and the feeling it made you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So it's this feeling that we're going to tackle head on today in this video. Where does it come from? And most importantly, are you a bad person for feeling it? So today, my friends, we will explore why you hate poor people. Now, when we consider poverty, right, you know, the idea of people living in squalor, having to work really hard jobs, earning very little, struggling to afford to eat, and some people even having to live on the street and beg. I think it's fair to say that most people, on like an individual humanistic level, understands there's something morally wrong about poverty existing. I don't know, Michael, it doesn't sit right with me. I haven't got the stomach for it. But this creates a problem, right? Whilst we all acknowledge it is morally wrong of a society to allow to have poverty, poverty obviously exists, seemingly everywhere, forever. It just seems to be a fact of life. It seems as though, for some reason, in order for society to function at all, we have to just accept that some people are going to live in terrible, awful conditions. And what makes this even more of a dilemma is that across nearly all major religions and philosophies, it tells us that caring and looking after the poor is a moral imperative. I'm talking from the Bible to the Quran, from Buddha to Confucius. The message that we are repeatedly told throughout history is that poverty is unjust and that the moral person and the moral society must address it. But you see, whilst this is supposed to be the moral basis that underpins our culture, that is expressed through the best writers, poets, philosophers, and even God himself, somehow poverty has always existed, and somehow, morally, we've always justified it. But you see, the moral justification for poverty wasn't just to ignore these religious teachings, etc. In fact, no, it was the opposite. It was to take these religious teachings and to very cleverly twist their meaning in order to justify a very different morality. Alright, so if we go all the way back to like ancient civilizations, I'm talking about the Greeks. You got a man like Plato, right? And he's sat there, he's doing this, and he's like just thinking about shit. And he recognises like poverty as a bad thing. He sees it as like it causes crime, social unrest. Like he doesn't like poverty. He thinks it's bad and he thinks you should do something about it. However, whilst he had that belief all the way back then, he also had the belief that society was split into different castes. So you had, you know, the gold caste, the silver, the bronze, and this is like the hierarchy with the wealthy and the poor at the bottom. He believed that each part of society served a purpose, but they probably should sort of stay in their lane. So okay, that's Plato. Poverty's bad, but probably there is going to be this hierarchy. A bit later, you get Aristotle. Aristotle believes that, you know, some people are just kind of naturally born to be slaves, right? It's in your blood. You are a slave by birth. So this allowed this society that was trying to be moral and trying to think about the world in a deeper way to sort of accept that, you know, there is an element that it needs to exist. However, right, we got to skip a lot of the timeline here, but let's jump all the way forward to when religion took root in feudal Europe. Jesus was pretty clear that poverty is immoral and like it shouldn't exist. Sort of like a core principle of his. However, in feudal Europe, they took these texts, these religious texts that they claimed to build their society upon, and they kind of reframed poverty as being actually part of God's will. They made it out so that the poor were poor for a reason. You know, for God to test their humility, to test how generous they were. And then if we step forward to the Enlightenment period, this is the time where industry has advanced massively along with science and rationality. And all through this time, poverty worsened. Right, despite all these advancements, despite all the new technology, it got worse and worse, and we needed to find a new way to morally justify it. And so, right, the justification for poverty's existence moved away from it being like a spiritual test and started being justified as like a necessary function for the economy to exist. Like it was framed that if we don't have poverty, everything would collapse and we would all die. And lots of people would find ways of justifying it. The British thinker Malthus argued that if we feed poor people, then the poor people will breed and there'll be too many poor people, we'll be overpopulated, so sorry guys, we can't feed you. By 1834, they did something very clever. In Britain, we established what was called the Poor Laws. Because at this period of time, we're wrestling with this idea that we're meant to be a Christian, religious society. The Bible tells us, fucking help the poor.
I want to start calling these fascists poor lords. They're like poor lords. They make everybody else around them poor by stealing money all the time.
And the
for everything, rent,
the deserving poor
food,
being like the old, the sick, the frail.
gas,
but the
eggs.
Undeserving poor, that was the lazy,
They're poor
the
lords,
idle, the alcoholics. And this was really clever because this was a reframing of what poverty was, because it allowed a society under capitalism who also claimed to be moral and Christian to once again morally justify the existence of poverty. And it was smart because they justified it by using religious texts. So if you open your Bible, right, you'll see that the Bible does say some boring woke shit like, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt to their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. So that's pretty annoying, right? If the moral basis of your society has those verses in it, it's kind of inconvenient. However, if you take your best scholars and you say, lads, look, can we do something about these verses? And they flick through the Bible, they will find a verse that says this: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not.
Let me out. Let me out. I'm wedged. I'm wedged. I cannot move. I'm fucking wedged all the time.
Alright, this was it, right? The boys had found it. They had found the way for their religion to justify poverty. And so this became the ideological basis for like Victorian Christian Protestant society. They interpreted the message of the Bible being that God demands of its people very hard work. They could now justify in their heads taking what they considered the undeserving poor and putting them into workhouses, which were basically prisons built for poor people to put them to work for basically pennies and in awful conditions where they would die continuously. And it was smart, right? Because this is a verse that really can be taken out of context and interpreted in kind of whatever way you feel. That same verse could easily be used to argue against landlords. It could easily be used to argue against inherited wealth or people who own massive factories and a deed that says that they own machinery, who all of these people, they inherit wealth by not working per se, but rather just owning large things and taking the profits, right? You could definitely reinterpret the verse to also include those people, but for some reason, that wasn't what the Victorians did. Having this vague category of undeserving poor allowed us to conveniently sweep all poor people in, whilst pretending to care about the deserving poor, when in reality, we probably didn't even do much about them either. This allowed us to reframe poverty as a personal moral failure, all whilst allowing society to feel like they were good moral people following God's teachings. Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 platform for building your own custom, beautiful, amazing website. For me, the best bit is the cutting-edge design tools. By using their Blueprint AI, anyone can have a perfectly customized and bespoke website. You can just tell the AI what your industry is, what your goals are for the website, and it will create a personally designed website filled with content and an amazing looking design. And from their award-winning templates, you can just pick and choose any of the designs that you like and really make your website stand out. A massive part of businesses these days is having an email marketing list so that you can send out things like product updates and events, etc. Squarespace allows you to make them as well as managing them and sending them out. Literally any time in the past that I've needed to make a website, I've always used Squarespace. It's simple, easy to use, and enjoyable. So be sure to head to squarespace.com to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch the website, go to squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Anyway, back to the video. Now look, this ideology, this sort of justification for poverty has a inbuilt problem in that it is fucking insane. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find many people that would argue if you were born in South Sudan that the reason that you're in poverty is because you're lazy. In the modern world today, we acknowledge that this way of thinking is obviously fucking nuts. It denies the many factors that cause poverty, right? We get that. So inevitably, in the Victorian era, this ideology would eventually reach a breaking point. In the early 1900s, right, as industrialism had created such inordinate wealth and created all these new technologies, the poor were living in squalor, in unsanitary, unstable conditions. And so, as the 1930s come in and the Great Depression,
Please, I'm wedged.
Like
I can't do
financial
anything.
crisis after a long list of other financial crises, all of which were mainly triggered by very wealthy bankers gambling on the economy, unregulated speculation. All of these financial crises would obviously impact the poorest people of society the worst. They were getting punished for what was effectively bankers fucking with the economy. And so it gets to this point, right? You're sort of in the 1920s-ish, and the poor turn around and they say, look, lads, I'm not that sure that it's us who are causing the whole poverty thing. I mean, like, if you think about our input, like, we kind of built all of the things like the railways, the buildings, and we physically built that stuff has made you guys really rich, and like we just had to sell my son's liver last week to pay rent. And so you see, right, by the sort of 1920s, 1930s, gradually a very different explanation for poverty was starting to gain traction, built off of new ideas developed by the philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This work, which was emerging during the 1800s, started to present a new theoretical understanding as to why poverty exists. And their argument was that poverty is a feature of capitalism. It's not a bug, it's not a glitch, it's not a moral failing. Poverty is structural. The argument effectively was, in order to have an extremely wealthy elite and to sustain that class of people, for them to have so much ownership over assets, lands, businesses, etc., for them to maintain that position, they needed to exploit the labour force. That means to say, pay them shit, right? Pay them shit, give them little to no worker protections, and give them basically no freedoms. If we didn't do that, right, and we gave everyone enough money to live and be happy, then this elite class of ultra wealthy individuals would lose their power. But you see, as this new totally crazy understanding of why poverty exists started to spread, one that was sure built on morality, but wasn't just moral, it was built on a more scientific, economic and structural view of society, as opposed to a purely religious and spiritual one. A view that reflected the rationality and scientific approach that was becoming more culturally significant in this period. This argument put the ruling class of society at the time in a bit of a difficult situation. One that put them once again in a position where they needed to find a new argument to justify why poverty needs to exist. Fascism, right? The fash boys. We're talking about them F boys. Alright, so what started out as like a biologist running around with like butterflies and going, man, nature's dope. Pretty sure humans came from monkeys. We're bros and that. Let's just fucking squad up. A young Charles Darwin created the basis of the modern understanding of what we call evolution. He was looking around at the animal kingdom and he started to notice that in the animal kingdom, there was this process that took place called natural selection. You can see where this is going, right? How the strongest animals manage to survive over the weakest. This process would refine the gene pool, right? If you're fucking Giga Chad super monkey and there's weak bitch beta boy, guess whose genes are gonna last, right? It's Big Daddy. And so this process over years, right, it refines the gene pool. It makes the perfect breeded species to survive. This process many refer to as the survival of the fittest. This phrase, right, survival of the fittest, this is often misaccredited to Charles Darwin. He never said it. It was actually accredited to Herbert Spencer, who, along with Charles Darwin's half-cousin called Francis Galton, these guys took Charles Darwin's study on the animal kingdom and started to apply them to human societies. That the best societies were survival of the fittest genetics. And they created a really fun idea called social Darwinism. That's very important to note that Charles Darwin himself didn't believe in social Darwinism. If you read through what he talks about, he seems to believe that what sets humans apart from animals, what makes us a civilized society, is our ability to feel sympathy and empathy. The fact that we protect the weak was quite literally a core part of what makes us human, and what actually led to us having successful societies. He acknowledged that civilized societies are very different to wild nature. And like, look, if you're listening to this and you're starting to think, yeah, maybe there is like a natural selection, maybe we need to refine our gene pool. Just hold on. Just wait a second. Just breathe. Have a think about it. Let's just think Stephen Hawking, right? Animal Kingdom. You and the bros are going out hunting, and Mary says, "Why don't you guys like take Stephen with you?" And you look at each other and you go, right? Stephen's dying in the Animal Kingdom. I'm just gonna say it. It's harsh, but he ain't lasting a minute. Now, despite Stephen being very physically disabled to the point that he was unable to speak, Stephen Hawking gave us some of the most important discoveries in physics. Different types of humans have different skills, and our ability to keep vulnerable, weak people alive is why we're such a successful species. Charles Darwin even warned himself that his work could be very much used to justify evil things. However, there were some people who chose to ignore Charles's warnings. Alright, jump forward, we're in Germany, it's 1933, it's like everything's fucked, the economy's bad, poverty, blah blah blah, you know what happened, Hitler comes along, right, and he sees that everything is fucked, and what he does is he comes up with a new explanation as to why poverty exists. And Hitler was genius with this, right, because what fascism did better than anyone else was to take the anger of the exploited working class and the poor people. All this anger that was very visible through the strikes, the social unrest, the rise of like communism and revolutionary thinking. It took that energy that was very often blaming the wealthy and blaming capitalism and managed to redirect it away and point it towards the impure. In order for Hitler to sell this idea, he had to repackage poverty itself. Hitler managed to reframe poverty as a symptom of weak genetics, both on like a personal, individual level, but also on a collective, societal level, that Germany had become weak. This allowed the thinking that both poverty was a symptom of personal weakness and genetics, so it allowed the German people to point at the very poor, the underclass typically of society, the poor Jews, the poor immigrants, the foreigners, the Roma people, the gays, the leftists, the disabled, but also symmetrically the weakness of the German people as a collective. So because Germany had become so weak, which Hitler argued was being taken advantage of by wealthy Jewish people, or being undermined by the revolutionary Marxists who they claimed were making them weak. And so the solution was simple, right? Germany had to regain its strength.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I'm getting tired and I'm starting to fade, so I'm just going to go to bed. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Thank you so much for your time. I am Skycatlive. I'm a full-time variety gamer all day, every day. Put me on in the background. Click on the cat's face to donate. Come to the skycat.live. That's my website. And come to my Twitch or my YouTube. Give me a like, sub, or a follow. Thank you so much for all this endless support that you guys give me. And thank you for all the supports and likes and follows and bits lately. And y'all have a wonderful day. It was a really good day. Got a Fortnite win today and a whole bunch of fucking Starfield done. And you know, it's a pretty good, pretty good time. So I love you guys. Thank you so much for your time. I'll see you tomorrow for some more games. Bye. Oh, I've got thousands of videos on my YouTube channel, which is reflected here. And if you like what you saw, you can always come back and see it. I'm getting a lot of hits lately, which is awesome. It's good to see a lot of hits. And so thank you so much for your time, guys. I'm going to upload these videos now, and I love you. Have a good evening.